with Mark Driscoll and myself, and Reeve's going to be going through Mark's website and various different things as we talk. It's going to be sort of an interview format. And Mark is also helping us, so Reeve and Mark in the background. Most of you are probably watching this as a replay. And if you have questions as we move along, please put them in if you're here live. And if you're watching replay, we've got a little background noise there. That's good to get rid of that now. Anyway, if you have questions as we move along and you're watching it on replay, you can also ask them there just by putting them in a comment or something else. So we're actually going to be switching, we think, away from GoToWebinar directly into Kajabi, which is our platform that we use for everything else that we do. They've now come up with their own webinar capabilities and podcast capabilities. So if we do that, it'll actually be easier on watching a replay to do chat. So we'll see about that. Mark, how often do you do these kinds of events? Do you do interviews?
Fairly often, kind of once a month, once every couple of months, but I do quite a lot of kind of conference presentations, that kind of stuff. So I was up at 6 o'clock this morning giving a presentation to a conference in Vietnam, actually. So I do more of that kind of stuff than interviews.
Okay. And is that one that you could have done live if they would have paid your way to go there, or was the whole
Well, they did offer to pay me to go to Hanoi, but you know, by the time you travel all the way out there, settle in for a couple of days coming back, it's you know, basically a week out of your quite a busy diary. So that's the beauty of these kind of platforms and technology these days. You couldn't have done this 10 years ago, I don't think, in the same way.
Right. Well, we're about a minute from getting started. For people that are on here, we'll actually start recording that and make it more formal, and I'll more formally introduce Mark. So we're just sort of chatting now, everybody. Mark, it's not a question. I've been getting more and more phone calls from Google, not listed on something. That's what that was, I believe. And they come in from phone numbers that'll be all over, so that they're, and it's usually a robot. It's not a human being. And so it's frustrating. So why don't we go ahead and open up, Mark? I've got top of the hour on my clock.
Sounds good.
All right. Hey, everybody. We are now formally starting our awesome podcast / webinar that we're sort of transitioning to calling our events podcasts. It seems like that's the term that's used now more frequently, with Mark Driscoll. We're really excited. Mark and I connected several months ago, I think, through just some research that I was doing. I was very excited about what he's doing in his business and life. And you see his website here, Tasting the Future. And we're going to just have a little interview here, make it very informal. I want to say right up front, if you guys have questions, I'd actually rather have you provide the questions to Mark than me. So if you've got them, put them in the question box. Mark and Reeve are behind the glass, as we say, and being sort of producers here, and they'll look at the questions. Mark and I will probably just keep interacting with each other and talking. So Mark, make sure to tell us, or Reeve, if we've got a question, and we'll just make sure we get it asked. So
yeah, sounds good.
Let's just start out and say, how you doing today, Mark? What's it like in your part of the world? You told me a little bit more earlier, but just tell us a little about where you're at and what the weather's like. I'm in northern Colorado. and it's a beautiful day today after we had rain last night. So that's a little bit about me for the day.
Well, it's quite a time difference, so it's 9 o'clock in the evening here. I'm based in the UK, about 3.5, 4 hours west of London. So on the English-Welsh borders. So out of my window, I can see the Malvern Hills. Nothing like probably the mountains you have in the United States, but beautiful nevertheless. Spring has been quite late here in the UK, and looking forward to some spring sunshine and a bit more spring-like temperatures. We had quite a sharp frost here this morning, and as I said to you earlier, Wayne, I've had quite a long day. I was up 6 o'clock this morning presenting at a conference that was happening in Hanoi, Vietnam, obviously virtually with that too.
By the way, I didn't share it earlier as you said that about Hanoi, but unfortunately, I have sort of negative images of Hanoi because of the Vietnam War, which I'm a product of that time frame. But yet, I always wanted to maybe go there. So I've been to Saigon in what was South Vietnam, but not now up into Hanoi. But it's kind of a long-term goal. So tell us about tasting the future, and what was your main kind of motivation behind starting your company?
Well, I set up Tasting the Future about 5.5 years ago now. So my background is in agriculture and environmental science. I've worked on sustainable food systems for 25 years, working predominantly within the civil society sector, so with NGOs. I spent 10 years working with WWF. That's not the World Wrestling Federation, WWF. This is the World Wildlife Fund organization. Another kind of 8 or 9 years working with another international nonprofit called Forum for the Future. And then 5 or 6 years ago, I kind of decided, I wanted to follow my own path. I had developed lots of relationships with stakeholders across the world, and I really wanted to align with my own passions and values. So I really set up Tasting the Future as a sustainable food systems consultancy, basically, working with businesses, for example, to embed sustainability within food and beverage businesses. And the other part of Tasting the Future is working to support other organizations with their food systems strategies, influencing policy and practice at a national, subnational, and I also work at an international level. Yeah, and I've kind of loved it. I've really loved the freedom to follow my own values, to be a bit pick and choosy with the types of organizations that I work with. Really keen to work with forward-thinking businesses, companies, organizations, governments that really are passionate about and understand the need to transform our food systems. And I thought Tasting the Future, in terms of a name, I do a lot of horizon scanning, trends analysis, looking at the kind of key trends, not just in the next year or two, but in the next 5, 10, or 15 years, because organizations have to understand those and the risks and opportunities that presents a business in order to be able to then maximize the opportunities from those trends or minimize the risks. So Tasting the Future is about that kind of visioning process, looking into the future with a future nod to the taste of food and the kind of foods that we might be eating in that future world, which is, fit for the future within planetary health limits. So that's where the kind of name comes from as well, Wayne.
Cool. Let's back up a little bit and talk about your past before. Let's go all the way back. Where'd you grow up? Again, in the similar area you're in, and tell us a little bit about your family growing up.
So I grew up in the county of Devon, which is in the southwest part of England. Quite a remote area of the country between the coast, about 10 miles from the Atlantic coast. So a spectacular coastline with cliffs of 600-800 feet high, and between the coast and the wild moors of southwest England. I actually grew up, as I say, in a very remote location. It was in the middle of a forest. So my parents moved there in the early 60s to an old railway cottage right in the middle of the forest. And I grew up with my two sisters at the time. My parents also fostered kids. So I had a foster brother and a foster sister. And I think that kind of opportunity to experience wild landscapes, just be let out the door of a weekend and go into the woods and to the forests, gave me a real appreciation and understanding of kind of nature and the natural world. And that's probably, where the kind of foundation for my future career path led me. And then from there, I obviously attended a kind of local secondary school, and then moved to a university. So it was an agricultural college in the southeast of England, Kent, where I did a degree in agriculture and environmental science, really building on from my passions and my values as a result of my childhood experiences. And then I suppose I've had quite a diverse career. Originally, I went to work for one of the biggest charities in the UK, the National Trust, which is a big landowner in the UK and conservation charity. I originally worked as a countryside manager, managing a number of nature reserves, countryside properties on behalf of the National Trust. So lots of countryside management, lots of environmental education for school kids, school trips. And then from there, I actually went overseas. So I went to Thailand for 3 years with an organization called Voluntary Services Overseas. I think you have similar organizations in the United States. They're called Peace Corps in the United States. So VSO, or Voluntary Services Overseas, is the equivalent of the Peace Corps. And there I spent 3 years working for the Royal Forestry Department as an environmental education advisor. I was living in a wildlife sanctuary between Bangkok and the Cambodian border, where I was working. I had to learn Thai, so I spent 4 months learning Thai. And Thai is a very tonal language, and I'm quite tone deaf, so I didn't find it easy. But I then worked with forest rangers building a school's environmental education program, running a variety of courses, all in Thai, and addressing some of the challenges they faced in Thailand around things like deforestation, poaching, forest fires, it's an increasingly rapidly urbanized society, and many of their national parks were facing many kind of challenges and pressures. And then when I went back to the UK, I went back into the kind of agriculture and food world, and I got a job with WWF UK, where I was asked to lead the development of their One Planet Food program. So this was a new program for WWF UK at the time. They'd done a lot of work on sustainable commodities around palm oil, fish, soya. They asked me to develop a program that took quite a systems perspective, looking at how you address some of the environmental, social, and economic impacts of food production and consumption. So lots of projects within WWF on sustainable healthy diets, regenerative agriculture, food waste, working to influence policy and practice. And from there, I moved to another organisation called Forum for the Future, based in the UK, but also offices in United States, India, Southeast Asia, where I became Associate Director of Sustainable Nutrition. So really working in that organisation to support food and beverage companies with their sustainability strategy. So really embedding sustainability as part of the business DNA. And from there, obviously, moved on to the freelance life with Taste in the Future. So quite a potted career journey from those early beginnings.
Completely different direction, and it's just relevant right now. How big of a deal are you perceiving that the upcoming coronation is in England, since you probably never lived through the previous one? Is that a big deal in the country?
Could you repeat the question, Wayne? You were a bit quiet on the question.
The coronation of the new king.
Oh, yes.
How big of a deal is that?
It is a big deal. It's I think a week on Saturday. Obviously, Queen Elizabeth reigned. You know, she was the longest reigning monarch we've ever had, and you know, her death was received with great sadness. She was really admired and respected for her public kind of service. But obviously now we have a new chapter, and King Charles now is our new monarch. He's actually somebody that's been very passionate actually about the environment, issues around climate change. He has been quite passionate and articulate about some of the kind of issues around architecture in the UK, climate change, deforestation. He's being criticised by some for being too vocal. Many think our monarchs should, you know, just form the public duty, but I really respect him for, you know, following his passions and values. So in the UK, on Saturday, there are lots of street parties planned, celebrations. We've got a long bank holiday. On Coronation Day, it's actually also the 18th birthday of my twin daughters. Katie and Mari turn 18 on the same day. I've got 3 daughters, and they're the youngest of my 3 daughters. So it will be a day to celebrate in more ways than one, Wayne.
Well, that was just because it's only relevant once in many, many years, at least this time, to ask that kind of a question. So,
yeah, good question.
yeah. So I was, Arib told us earlier that he had put together a list of a whole bunch of questions. I got to share this. There are 40 of them here, everybody. And they're all really good ones. But here's one that I thought was really pretty cool. How do you envision the future of food systems, just generally? And how do you foresee that tasting the future will play a role in that? So what do you see as our systems of food moving forward?
Yeah. It's a really good question. It's a really big question. But, I think the way we eat, produce, consume, distribute food, in my view, is at the heart of many of the environmental, social, health challenges we confront, in the 21st century. There is no silver bullet solution. We know, globally, our food system contributes some 30 to 34% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's both through direct and indirect emissions. So many emissions occur through land use change, through things like deforestation. WWF attributes it to some 80% of global biodiversity loss. So we're living through the 6th biggest extinction episode of natural species, in the last 4 billion years. And yet at the same time, we have a global health crisis. We have an obesity crisis and associated non-communicable diseases. Probably 1 billion people obese or overweight, and yet perversely 850 million suffering from hunger. So food really goes at the heart of some of those challenges. And so my vision is really a vision for a food system that is fit for future generations, that restores both planetary and human health. And I use visioning quite a lot with my work with both businesses and other organizations, because I think I wouldn't be doing this work unless I was positive. I think human societies are innovative enough. There are some brilliant examples of innovation, social collaboration, coming together to address some of these challenges, which are big, scary, but I believe in the power of human innovation to be able to tackle some of those challenges.
So in the UK, let's say specifically, how far away, do you ever hear them say, in the US here, we say that our food comes from an average of 1,500 to 2,000 miles away on average. You hear that same kind of a statement in the UK, or is your food a little more localized than it is here in the States?
No, it's probably about the same. So in the UK, we import probably about 40% of the food that we consume. So there are some real challenges there. I think particularly in the context of things like the war in Ukraine, the resilience of food systems have been really highlighted. If you think about the war and the impacts that has had on fertilizer availability, when Ukraine and Russia together, I think, produced kind of 40 to 50% of the world's fertilizers, that war in that part of the world saw a significant price spike in the cost of fertilizers. And obviously, Ukraine, parts of Russia are big exporters of wheat, and you notice significant price rises in things like wheat, which have affected particularly vulnerable countries in parts of Africa, for example. So, I think more localized food systems are important, not just from a sustainability perspective, but from a resilience perspective. Unfortunately, we do import a lot of our fresh fruit and vegetables from other parts of the world. Where I live in the county of Herefordshire, just before the Second World War, half the county was planted up with traditional fruit orchards, particularly apple orchards. We used to be quite reliant on the production of apples, and yet today 60% of our apples are imported from other parts of the world, predominantly New Zealand. That does seem a little bit crazy to be importing apples to the UK from New Zealand when we could perfectly adequately grow them in the UK. So there are, I think, still significant opportunities to be a bit more self-sufficient in the foods that can easily be grown here in the UK. But obviously, our food systems have become quite globalized. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as it benefits the kind of local growers and communities. But I think opportunities to shorten our food supply chains in an increasingly volatile world will be increasingly important.
So do you think that we're making the proper gains in the farming communities that you see? I've been, very active in regenerative and sustainable agriculture. I am a farmer myself. I produce food, I produce fiber, I produce a number of things, compost, and I've been doing it for 17, 18 years, and yet I don't see the growth that I would hope. At Earth Day this last weekend, which we celebrate on April 22nd every year, I think that's a worldwide sort of a thing, but at least here in the US, there were less booths at an Earth Day event that's been going on here for the whole 18 years I've been here than there were last year, for example. Less companies there promoting regenerative and sustainable sorts of living circumstances. It's not a great trend, I don't see. Do you see something better, I hope, over in the UK?
I think it's an interesting one, Wayne. I think, there is a lot more to be done. I've also got a small holding, quite a small holding. I've got 30 acres, so I like to connect my head with my hands and bury my own hands in the soil. So I also grow a lot of kind of fresh fruit and vegetables. I love kind of permaculture gardening. I've been replanting a kind of traditional nut and fruit orchard and graze sheep under that. And I think there's real opportunities to connect people with the land. I think there is quite a debate about the role of the future of farming. I think the new buzzword, as you've just mentioned, is kind of regenerative farming. It's still happening at quite a small scale. So, although some of the bigger companies now, the kind of General Millses of this world, the Danones, some of the big agri-food companies are starting to look at regenerative agriculture, putting more carbon back into soils, increasing on-farm biodiversity. I think it's still at the kind of margins. There's a lot to be done to mainstream regenerative agricultural practices, no-till farming, mulching, cover cropping, biochar. You know, there's some great kind of opportunities and techniques there. There's also a new movement around almost a step beyond regenerative farming, around agroecological farming. So that's more of a social movement looking at a kind of regenerating local communities, developing social networks and peer-to-peer learning between farmers. But, you know, many farmers, certainly in the UK, are really being squeezed, and we really need to support them further with that kind of transition to more nature-friendly, environmentally friendly forms of farming. I know in the US, you know, you have the Farm Bill, for example, that provides significant subsidies that influences farmer behavior. In the UK, we've come out of the Brexit kind of discussion. We're now out of the EU, so we're not reliant on common agricultural policy subsidies. And the UK government are now looking at, you know, more subsidies providing money for public goods. So providing farmers with money for environmental improvements, not just food production. So there are opportunities, but in my view, it does need more government support to provide the fiscal incentives for farmers to ensure, you know, there is a just transition and farmers aren't penalised. But there is significantly much more work to be done on that whole agenda.
So a little more back on sort of a little personal things. We talked about your growing up and your family and such. Who was a person that during, let's say, your youth, from up to university age, let's say, had the most influence on you outside of your family in terms of what you're now doing with Tasting the Future? Can you think of a person's name?
Yeah, so there's a really well-known naturalist here in the UK called David Attenborough. I'm not sure whether you guys have come across him.
No,
he's done quite a lot of series. He did a real kind of series that really kind of opened my eyes when I was probably 8, 9, 10, or in my early teens. He developed this series called Life on Earth, which was the first kind of nature series that really kind of looked at you know, the wonders of life on Earth, the diversity of ecosystems, the relationships between us as humans and the natural world. He's, I think, 96, 97 now, and he's still producing these natural history programs. And I think, you know, he really influenced me as a child when I was quite young, and opened my eyes to the wonders of the natural world, and subsequently the kind of how we're impacting on the natural world, and how actually intertwined we are with that natural world, and how ecosystems are really at the heart of, you know, our cultural, spiritual well-being and economic well-being. And if we lose that natural capital, then we really undermine the capital of our future health and well-being. So he was, one of those people that really kind of inspired me at a young age, I think, Wayne.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have heard of him and know about him a little bit. So how about today? Who would you consider a mentor, a true mentor, as it relates to what you do in your business today? Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's a really good question. There are, I suppose there are so many kind of people have kind of inspired me over the years. I think that there are one or two people that I've met from businesses that have really kind of inspired me. I've been lucky enough to people like, I'm not sure whether you've heard of people like Paul Polman, who led Unilever, Wayne. But he, I suppose, really kind of inspired me in my early career to really start thinking about systems transformation and the importance of looking at systems and how you can intervene across systems. He really transformed Unilever, to ensure it became an organization that had sustainability at the heart of its business DNA. So he really looked at new kind of business models, new ways of incentivizing his team from the factory floor all the way up to kind of senior management. So there are people like Paul that have been a real inspiration to me, certainly in the latter part of my career.
So looking back on your career journey so far, what advice would you give someone just starting out? So remember back to those days, but what today would you give advice-wise? And they're starting out in the field of food sustainability or considering a career. What's the best advice that you think you could give them?
So I think, one is to follow your passion, follow your values. I think, getting your first foot on the rung of the ladder is always the most difficult thing to do. Particularly when you're fresh out of university, you're often in a catch-22 situation. Really difficult to get jobs until you get kind of experience. I actually, started my career when I immediately left university, doing a bit of kind of internship and volunteering, getting that experience, getting to know some of the players in the field that you want to work within. But yeah, follow your passions, follow your values. I think, a lot of where I've perhaps been successful, obviously it is part of what I know, but actually more opportunities come from, developing relationships and contacts with people working within the food system. So the importance of building relationships is absolutely key. And if you're passionate and enthusiastic about something, don't give up at the first hurdle. It's easy to give up when you meet a first hurdle. Keep on at it, keep trying, and your passion and enthusiasm will actually win through. And you might not land on your perfect job. I don't know if we ever land on our perfect job, but try working for a variety of organizations if you're not quite sure whether you want to work for a business, an NGO, in the finance sector or in food production, wherever it may be, try a variety of roles and jobs, as part of your early career.
Cool. Well, this is a question from the audience. Do you see a trajectory that a majority of people would pay more for organic or carbon neutral products? Do you think they're willing to pay more?
That's a really good question. So I'm not so sure. I think consumers. If it affects consumers in the pocket, a lot of the research suggests that consumer behavior, what they put in their supermarket trolley, price is basically the overwhelming driver, even if they're concerned about sustainability issues. It's usually price, taste, often healthiness. Sustainability comes quite low down when it comes to changing consumer behavior. Consumers may say they're concerned by sustainability, but if it affects them in their pocket, and particularly the poorest and most vulnerable in society, then they won't pay for it. I think we do need to price in carbon to our food system, but actually that needs to happen through other ways and through other mechanisms. We don't really pay the true cost of food. If we were really to pay the true cost of food, we would be paying 3 times as much for the food that we do today. We'd be paying once for the food in our supermarket trolley, once in terms of the health costs. If you think of the public health costs of obesity, non-communicable diseases, antimicrobial resistance to society, it's huge. And we pay again for the environmental costs. So we have to really think about rebalancing the true cost of food and reorientating subsidies, fiscal incentives, and incentives to reward farmers for things like regenerative agriculture, ensure that low carbon foods like fresh fruit and vegetables are subsidized, and high carbon foods like intensively produced meats, dairy, etc., which probably get 90% of their subsidies, are disincentivized. So this is about, for me, leveling the playing field, ensuring subsidies go towards more low carbon foods, and influencing consumer behaviors through other fiscal incentive mechanisms. But if it's going to impact the price of food consumers pay, they just won't pay it, particularly when many societies are being impacted through a cost of living crisis as we're going through today.
So here's another one that I have, plus I think in our audience they have. How do you stay updated today on the latest trends, technologies, and research, let's say, in the food sustainability space? You personally, what's the way you do it? Do you do it on the internet? Do you?
So I do attend lots of conferences, seminars. I do a lot of research. So I work quite a lot with the academic community, with the latest kind of technological social innovation trends. But I suppose where I pick up most of it is talking to those companies, farmers, food distributors, food traders, that are at the cutting edge of this work. So it's about having conversations and conversations in different parts of the world. And I do a lot of kind of horizon scanning and trends analysis, because businesses need to be thinking more long term. Often businesses have a kind of 2 or 3 year business plan or CSR strategy. They don't look out into the long term, the trends that are going to impact them on the next 5 or 10 years. And if they're not prepared for those trends, they won't have a business in 10 years. It's a bit like the company Kodak. It's not a food business, but it was a photography company that wasn't prepared for the digital revolution, and therefore went out of business quite quickly. So yeah, I suppose I pick up trends from a variety of sources, but probably most significantly from having conversations with businesses that are involved in the food system. And these trends are there are global macro trends, there are industry trends, there are kind of niche trends, and these trends do vary depending on where you're sitting in the world. Trends that are relevant to Europe and North America might not be same, in Southeast Asia, where sustainability and consumer consciousness of sustainability is only now just starting to get onto the radar.
Again, a little bit off the topic, but just curiosity. Have you stayed up with your ability to both speak and read Thai?
No, unfortunately not. When I was in Thailand, I did have a Thai girlfriend, and that always helped with a Thai language. But I left Thailand, 20 odd years ago, and apart from having an odd meal and conversation in a Thai restaurant, I've never really had an opportunity to use it. So I'm a bit rusty. I might be able to say my name in Thai or something like that, or say hello in Thai, but to have a conversation or to do a training in Thai, there's no way I would be able to do it now. I think that's one thing I kind of really regret, because staying in somewhere like Thailand, living and working within the community, you really get to know the culture, you get to meet the local people, and you're really embedded in the culture and community, which is what I loved, and it's a memory that will always stay with me, apart from obviously being very rusty in the Thai language now. But hey ho, that's one of those things.
So this is a question I try to ask almost everybody that I talk with, and that's that, and it's one that John Lee Dumas, who is one of my mentors in the podcasting area, he does a podcast called Entrepreneur on Fire, and he does it daily, or it is put out daily, and he's done it for something like 10,000 plus straight days now.
Wow.
No, that's not. It's not 10,000, because that would be 10 years.
I was going to say, that's a long time.
No, but I think it's in the 2,200. He's done it almost like 8 years in a row. And he doesn't do it like daily. He records 10 sessions on one day, and then those 10 will be the next 10 days. And then 10 days later, he records 10 more sessions. But you can imagine it gets a little tough you run out of people to interview. But anyway, here's a question he asks just about everybody, which is, tell us about something that has happened in your life that at the time it happened, it seemed like it was just the most horrible thing that could ever occur. But now when you look back on it, it had a really positive future outcome on your life? And you can be
Wow,
very,
that's quite a question, isn't it?
yeah, you can be specific or you can be really general. And by the way, he never preps people, and I don't either, for that question. So it is one that kind of comes out of the blue.
Yeah, gosh, I think it probably, for me, has to be around kind of a, relationship when I was much younger, really kind of heavily involved in a long-term relationship that kind of broke down for a variety of reasons, and it was quite traumatic. At the time, got kind of quite depressed and drinking and that kind of stuff. But actually, looking back now, it actually kind of helped me think with a lot of kind of clarity, unless you really experience those really kind of low points. I don't think you can experience the high points in your life. And I think a number of years further on, I reflect back that actually, I was very young at the time. I was probably quite immature, didn't really have kind of life experiences. But actually, that was probably the best thing that could ever have happened to me, and led me into a kind of, at the time, that's why I kind of went to Thailand, and that opened up all sorts of opportunities, opened up my career, opened up my own horizons, and really kind of gave me time for self-reflection in terms of, what I really value in life, and what really kind of makes me kind of happy and what makes me tick. So I suspect quite a lot of people will say something like that, but reflecting back, that's probably something that was really kind of traumatic at the time, but actually opened all sorts of doors, opportunities in my own eyes, in the long term, I think, Wayne.
Very cool. Here's a much more fun one. What's a tool? And it could be a physical tool, or it could be an internet related tool, anything that you've used for the first time in the last 6 months, let's say, that you would highly recommend to someone else that they ought to get or use.
What tool? So I've come across something. So on my kind of small holding, I have come across a tool called a bill hook. Have you heard of a bill hook, Wayne?
I have, no. So tell me.
It's kind of like it's like a machete with a curved. It's called a bill hook because it's got a very curved blade. It's about a foot long with a wooden handle. It's got a kind of straight back. A bill hook is quite a traditional farmer's tool, certainly in the UK, that was invented 500 or 600 years ago, actually. And I came across it because it's a tool that I've used recently in hedging. So in the UK, as a result of the enclosure movement in the 17th and 18th century, a lot of our land was enclosed using stone or earth banks, on top of which you grow trees. So you have these kind of traditional, what we call hedgerows. You don't see them so much in the US, but it's very characteristic of the British landscape, these very small fields enclosed in hedgerows with lots of trees. And traditionally, farmers used to manage those hedgerows by layering the hedge. And to do this, they used a tool called a bill hook. And to layer a hedge, you cut the back of a stem of a tree that's about 5 or 6 years old, so you don't cut straight through it. You bend over it so the sap can still rise, and it kind of sprouts up and thickens the hedgerow, makes a great wildlife-friendly hedgerow. But this is a specific tool which is used in that process, and I absolutely love it, and I love using it, and I love the process of
Seems like it's taken you a while.
It's called.
Seems like it's taken you a while to find it, because it sounds like
It does, yeah. I didn't really know it exists until I spoke to this older farmer that has always done a lot of hedge laying. Hedge laying is a really traditional skill that's kind of died out, because every autumn now farmers cut these hedgerows using tractor hedge, mechanical flails that just flail it, and so they don't lay these hedgerows. They used to take timber out in the olden days, layer them to make the hedgerows stop-proof. And the bill hook was the traditional tool for the job. So just an interesting little tool that I've discovered fairly recently.
So here's another one from the audience. So what would you replace honeysuckle in a riparian buffer with? Well, that's where this is Karen. She's one of my staff. She always has.
What was the
this might be too specific for you, but what would you replace honeysuckle in a riparian buffer with? Would it be better to remove the honeysuckle in a riparian buffer if that is 70% of the buffer? And I don't even know, do you have honeysuckle there?
We do have honeysuckle, yeah. It's a climbing plant that grows through hedgerows, grows up trees. It's a great nectar source for insects. So the more honeysuckle, in my view, the better. It also lets off this amazing scent, so it's got a very sweet smelling scent, and you can smell the perfume, particularly in the early morning or late evening. So I don't think you can have enough of it. So I've never.
You wouldn't think about it.
Problem or dominating anything. So,
what would you say is your most the one exotic that you've got on your holding that you would get rid of if you could?
Can you repeat the question, Wayne? Sorry,
What would be a plant that is not native? It's an exotic. That you have on your holding that you would get rid of if you could.
Okay. Yeah, there's a plant called Himalayan balsam, also known as policeman's helmet locally. That, as the plant name suggests, originated from the Himalayas. It's a very invasive species along our waterways and rivers. It grows very, very quickly. It produces these deep purple flowers, and the seeds, it has a mechanism, whereas the seeds dry, there's a kind of spring-like mechanism that springs when they get to a certain dryness. It automatically fires these seeds. They can go for 10, 15, 20 feet, float down a river, but they can really dominate rivers and waterways to the exclusion of quite a lot of native flora and fauna. So that's one invasive species I would definitely get rid of. Again, I don't know whether you have it in the United States or it might be called something else. I don't know.
No, I've not heard of it, and it might be in another part of the country. Aaron, who asked the question about honeysuckle, said that honeysuckle is absolutely an invasive in Ohio, which is where she's from.
Oh, okay. It's not here. I'm pretty sure it's a native here. Yeah.
Yeah. That might be why it's a native there and therefore good. And here it's
that's why I was a bit confused with the question, I think.
Well, we are getting close to the top of the hour here, and we'd like to be very cordial to our speaker, to Mark, and then also to you in the audience. And a lot of you have stayed on here and been around since the very start. That's very cool. Thank you. Alicia, by the way, I didn't acknowledge her, but she always puts in lots of really cool references, Mark. She's a regular of ours. And so I'll be sending you this. You'll get a replay of this. And so you'll have it. You might look at the things that Alicia put in because they're usually very insightful.
Oh, I will have a look. I can't see anything on my screen, but I will definitely have a look at the replay.
Wouldn't necessarily see them. Anyway, let's let you finish by just giving us what would be a last message that you want to give to all of us, and just end it with that.
I suppose just, obviously food is at the heart of everything I do. I enjoy, eating it, and it's a connector for family and cultures, and it's the heart of some of the, some of the challenges I mentioned. So, just I think we can all make a difference by the kind of food choices that that we're certainly in the West lucky enough to make three times a day. So think carefully about the food choices you make. It has a big impact on planetary health, human health, and the impact of farmers and livelihoods, often many thousands of miles away. So perhaps just leave you with that kind of thought, really.
Well, Mark, thank you very much. This was really enjoyable to me. I had fun. Did you? I hope.
Yes, I had much fun, and I like your questioning style, Wayne. I like the informality of it, and some quite left of field questions amongst it, which makes for a nice change.
You can steal them and use them yourself.
I might do.
Well, Mark, thank you so much. Audience, thank you. Alicia says, keep up the good work. Give us some ones if you can. People, as are clapping, is what you do online. We're seeing some ones come in. That's cool. And Mark, have a great rest for the rest of your day. And then maybe we can do this again sometime. I'd love it. It'd be fun.
Yeah. I might have a hot drink. It's 10 o'clock here, and might have a hot drink before heading for bed. But enjoy the rest of your afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are.
Thank you, Mark. And Mark.
All right, take care. Cheers then. Bye.